Welcome back to Bookcast Bestsellers in Minutes, ready to tackle another deep dive.
Always.
This time we're looking at Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind.
A Brief History of Humankind covering 13.5 billion years.
Yeah, that title's kind of ironic, right?
A bit. But hey, Harari does pack a lot in. From the Big Bang to the future of intelligent design, he tries to cover it all.
Talk about ambitious.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, we're diving into the entire history of humankind.
Yeah.
From the very beginning to, well, potentially even beyond where we are now.
Exactly. And what makes this book so interesting is how Harari connects everything. He doesn't just lay out a dry timeline.
Right.
He weaves in biology, anthropology, history, even philosophy. It's like a tapestry of the human story.
So where does he even begin?
With the cognitive revolution. It happened roughly 70,000 years ago and was a major turning point for us.
For humans in general, or specifically for us, Homo sapiens.
For Homo sapiens, that's when we developed language, abstract thought, the ability to believe in things that don't physically exist, like gods, nations, money.
Wait, money doesn't physically exist.
Well, not like a tree or a rock. It's a shared belief. We all agree to give it value. And this ability to believe in what Harari calls imagined realities was key for Homo sapiens to succeed.
Makes sense.
We could cooperate in large numbers, build complex societies, and, well, eventually dominate the planet.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this deep dive might get a little mind-bending. So, before the cognitive revolution, what were humans like?
Well, for one thing, we weren't alone. For a big chunk of human history, multiple human species were hanging out together.
Seriously? Like, imagine bumping into a Neanderthal at the grocery store.
Exactly. Or a Denisovan. And they weren't just dumb cavemen either.
Right, they were complex beings with their own cultures and everything.
Exactly. It really makes you rethink what it means to be human.
It does. So why do you think Homo sapiens ended up outcompeting these other species?
That's a question that keeps anthropologists up at night. Harari thinks our capacity for language and abstract thought gave us an edge. He even has this fascinating theory that language might have evolved, at least in part, for gossiping.
Gossiping? Come on!
I know, right? But think about it. In hunter-gatherer societies, knowing the social dynamics of your group was crucial. Who to trust, who to avoid, who's hooking up with whom.
Oh, I see, yeah.
That kind of information was key for survival.
So spreading the latest gossip was actually a survival skill.
It might have been.
There's a fun fact for our listeners.
Right. It highlights how something seemingly trivial can have a big impact on evolution. And of course, this ability to communicate also allowed Homo sapiens to create those imagined realities. Shared beliefs that helped us cooperate on a massive scale.
You mentioned money as an example of an imagined reality earlier. What are some others?
Nations. There's no physical line separating one country from another.
It's a concept.
It's an agreement we collectively believe in.
Right.
Same with religions, corporations, legal systems, all imagined realities that shape our lives.
So, in a way, are these imagined realities what separate us from other animals?
Exactly. No other species has been able to create and sustain such complex systems of belief.
And those systems, they've led to both good and bad, haven't they?
Absolutely. They're double-edged swords.
We often think about ancient foragers as having these simpler, happier lives. Harari kind of debunks that, doesn't he?
He does. He says foragers probably had more diverse diets and worked fewer hours than early farmers, but
Their lives were still tough.
right. Full of danger and hardship. We shouldn't romanticize the past.
Oh, noble savage myth allowed. So what about their inner lives? What did they believe in?
Well, written records from that time are scarce, but evidence suggests many ancient foragers were animistic.
Amnesty.
They saw spirits in everything, trees, rocks, animals.
Wow.
Humans were just one part of this huge interconnected web of being.
I can see how that would be both fascinating and a little terrifying, to feel so connected to everything around you.
Absolutely. And it challenges our modern human-centric worldview. Imagine living in a world where spirits could talk to you through the rustling leaves or a babbling brook.
It really highlights how much our beliefs shape our reality, even today. We might not believe in talking trees anymore, but our world is built on its own set of imagined reality.
Exactly. Things like democracy, capitalism, human rights.
Concepts that have a very real impact on how we live and work and interact with each other.
Right. It's amazing how these intangible ideas can shape our concrete world.
It is. And I'm guessing the story doesn't end there, right? What happens after the cognitive revolution?
Well, that's when things get really interesting. Enter the agricultural revolution. which, by the way, Harari calls history's biggest fraud.
Hold on. Fraud. How can something as fundamental as agriculture be a fraud?
It's a bold statement, for sure. But to understand why he says that, we need to shift our perspective. What if we look at agriculture not as a human triumph, but from the point of view of, say, wheat?
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Tell me more about this wheat's eye view of history.
Well, so we were talking about wheat.
Yeah, how did wheat trick us into, all this?
Think about it. It used to be just a wild grass competing with other plants. Then along came humans, cultivating it, weeding out its rivals, spreading it all over.
So instead of us domesticating wheat, it kind of domesticated us.
Exactly. From wheat's perspective, it hit the jackpot, got humans to provide the perfect growing conditions, guaranteed its survival.
Wow.
And for humans, this shift had huge consequences, both good and bad.
The good's pretty obvious, right? More stable food supply, settling in one place, developing complex societies.
Sure. But there were downsides, too. Agriculture is a lot more work than foraging.
Right.
Hunter-gatherers could find food in a few hours. Farmers, though, they had to toil endlessly, clearing land, planting, weeding, harvesting.
Hard work.
It was. And their diets became less diverse, relying on just a few staple crops, so more vulnerable to famine.
Ah, so a trade-off. Stability versus variety.
Precisely. And then, with agriculture, came social hierarchies. Some people accumulated more land, more resources than others. We also see more violence and conflict, fights over land, water, all those resources.
So not quite the peaceful image of early farmers living in harmony with nature.
Not quite. And as Harari points out, once we'd invested so much in agriculture, there was no turning back. More people meant more mouths to feed. All those possessions made it impossible to just go back to being nomadic.
We were trapped by our own success.
Kind of, yeah. The trap had snapped shut. And to manage these bigger, more complex societies, humans had to rely even more on those imagined realities we talked about earlier.
Fascinating. So even though agriculture had downsides, it paved the way for everything that came after.
Absolutely. The agricultural revolution was a pivotal point. Cities, empires, the world we live in today, it all has roots in agriculture.
So much stemmed from it.
Right. But of course, it came with new challenges and complexities, too.
Which I'm sure Harari dives into.
Oh, he does. To really get his point, we need to look at exactly how the agricultural revolution changed human societies, how it reshaped our relationship with nature.
Okay.
Harari argues that these larger societies functioned because of what he calls imagined orders.
Imagined orders. What are those?
Remember imagined realities?
Yeah.
Nations, religions, legal systems. Those are all examples of imagined orders, too. They're sets of rules, hierarchies, beliefs that we collectively agree to follow, not based on any natural law, really.
But on shared stories and myths.
Exactly.
So it's like a social contract we all agree to, even if it's not written down.
Exactly. And these imagined orders, they're essential for keeping things stable, for cooperation in large societies.
I can see that. Otherwise, it would be chaos.
Right. Millions of people couldn't coordinate their actions without some kind of shared framework.
But these imagined orders, they're not always fair.
Right. Unfortunately not. Harari makes that very clear. Imagined orders can lead to inequality, discrimination, oppression. He says there's no truly just system. Every imagined order benefits some groups more than others.
Are there any examples of that throughout history?
Tons of examples. Think about gender roles. For centuries, patriarchy, the idea that men are better than women, has been a dominant imagined order.
It's used to justify so much. Unequal pay, restricting women's freedoms.
Exactly, and it has no basis in science. There's no proof that women are less capable. It's purely a social construct, an imagined order to keep power imbalances.
So how do these imagined orders even come about? Who gets to make the rules everyone else has to follow?
It's complicated, but it usually involves power, persuasion, tradition. People in authority, kings, priests, emperors, they benefit from keeping the status quo, and they use tools to reinforce it: religion, laws, education.
But these imagined orders are challenged sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And then things change.
Of course. History's full of examples. The abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, they all challenged the power structures and pushed society forward.
It's a good reminder that these imagined orders, however powerful they can be changed, we can choose to change them.
Exactly, and that's a key takeaway from Harari's book. History isn't fixed. We have the power to shape our own future.
But navigating all these systems, these imagined orders, it's tough. What does Harari suggest we do?
He says it's all about critical thinking, questioning our assumptions, examining the stories we've been told.
To look deeper and see the power dynamics at play.
Right, like understanding the code of the system so we can make better choices. And this is especially important now with technology changing everything so fast.
Speaking of technology, Harari talks about how money unified humankind.
Yeah. Money's another fascinating example of an imagined order that shaped history. It's basically a system of trust. We all believe that these pieces of paper or digital tokens have value, and that belief has allowed for trade and exchange on a massive scale.
So money's kind of like the oil that keeps the global economy running.
In a way, yes. It makes trade easier, encourages specialization, creates a world where people from different cultures can cooperate economically.
But it has downsides too. Right?
Of course. Harari criticizes how money can reduce everything to its economic value.
Right.
He argues that it can erode traditional values. It can lead to exploitation of people and the environment.
So, like a lot of things Harari talks about, it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly. Which brings us to another turning point, the scientific revolution. But before we get into that, let's pause and think about what we've covered so far. The cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, imagined realities, the unifying power of money.
It is amazing how it all ties together, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one big interconnected story.
It is, and it shows how good Harari is at bringing together huge amounts of information and making it engaging, making it thought-provoking.
And it makes you realize that history isn't just dates and names. It's about us. It's about what it means to be human.
Exactly. And that story's still being written.
Yeah.
The choices we make today, they're shaping the future. But to make good choices, we need to understand the forces that got us here. And that's what Harari helps us do.
And that brings us to the scientific revolution.
Yeah.
And what Harari has to say about the future of humankind.
That's next. So the scientific revolution, it really changed how we see the world and our place in it.
Yeah, Harari argues it was more than just new discoveries, right? Like a whole new way of thinking about knowledge.
Exactly. Before, knowledge came from religion or philosophy. They claimed to have all the answers. But the scientific revolution was different.
Different how?
It embraced the idea that we always have more to learn, that what we know now could change with new evidence.
So moving away from dogma and towards observation and experimentation.
Exactly. And a few things drove this shift, like rediscovering ancient Greek texts, inventing the printing press,
Oh, yeah.
and the rise of merchants who wanted to invest in exploration and new ideas.
It sounds like a perfect storm for an intellectual revolution.
It was. And one key thing about the scientific revolution, scientists became okay with saying, I don't know. Like
Interesting.
they weren't satisfied with old wisdom or what authority figures told them.
Right.
They wanted to test ideas for themselves, see how things worked in the real world.
Totally different from how knowledge was pursued before.
It was a radical change, and this new approach led to so many discoveries. It changed how we understood everything, from the human body to the entire universe.
Wow.
We see new theories in astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, all based on observation, experiments, and math.
And those discoveries didn't just stay in the lab, right? They affected society too.
Absolutely. The scientific revolution led to new technologies that changed how we live, work, and interact with the world.
Like?
Think about the steam engine, the telegraph, the telephone,
Yeah.
all made possible because of those scientific breakthroughs.
But the scientific revolution wasn't all sunshine and roses, was it? Harari talks about a darker side too.
He does. He points out the link between science, empire, and capitalism.
Oh. A lot of scientific discoveries were fueled by empires wanting to expand.
So they needed things like better maps and clocks, more advanced tech to explore and conquer new lands.
Yeah, exactly. And sadly, that often led to exploiting and oppressing native people. Harari doesn't shy away from that.
Right.
He says we need to see the whole picture of the scientific revolution, both the good and the bad.
That's a good point. Even good intentions can have negative consequences.
That's right. And that brings us to the Industrial Revolution, which, in Harari's view, comes directly from the scientific revolution.
How so?
The scientific discoveries paved the way for the tech that fueled the Industrial Revolution. Factories popped up, mass production started, and cities grew.
A complete transformation.
It was. People moved from rural areas to urban centers looking for jobs.
That created new challenges and social structures.
It did. And as production ramped up, so did the need to sell all those goods. That's where consumerism comes in.
Interesting.
New marketing tactics emerged. We started to believe that happiness meant having more stuff. Sounds familiar.
Right. In many ways, the Industrial Revolution set the stage for the world we live in today.
with its focus on economic growth and material possessions. But are we really happier?
That's the big question, isn't it? Harari points out that despite all our material progress, we don't seem to be any happier than our ancestors.
Sobering thought. So what now? What about the future of humankind?
Harari thinks we're on the brink of huge changes, driven by tech that blurs the lines between humans and machines.
This is where things start to sound like science fiction.
I know. But these technologies are being developed now. Genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, they could completely redefine what it means to be human.
It's both thrilling and a little scary to think about.
It is, and Harari doesn't try to give us all the answers.
Right.
He just lays out the challenges and opportunities and encourages us to have serious conversations about the future we want to build.
So we've gone from the very beginning of humanity to the future of intelligent design. It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've explored those big questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going?
And it's all thanks to Harari's ability to break down complex ideas and connect different fields of knowledge.
Right.
He leaves us with a lot to ponder.
He does. His book isn't just a history lesson. It's a call to action.
A challenge to use what we know about the past to build a better future.
Exactly.
That's a powerful message, something we should all remember as we face the challenges of the 21st century.
I agree. The future isn't set in stone. We have the power to shape it, but we need to understand how we got here. And that's what Sapiens helps us do.
Well, that brings our deep dive into Sapiens, a brief history of humankind, to a close. We hope you enjoyed this journey and that it's made you curious to explore more about humanity's past, present, and future. Thanks for listening to Bookcast Bestsellers in Minutes.